Hello, you're watching the Great Canoe Bagel here, and today I have another BC provincial election forecast. Now, before I begin, I'd like to once again shout out the channel members. I appreciate you guys for supporting the channel, and if you guys want, anyone else wants to help support the channel, go into the link in the description below and press that join button. Otherwise, do your normal things, like, share, subscribe, and comment below. But no further ado, let us begin. And I say that, but I actually have another thing to say first. I have in the pinned comment below my poll I've been running for the last week now. I'm going to keep running it. I originally said I was going to run it for a month. Not sure if I actually will. We'll see if responses keep rolling in consistently. If they are, I'll keep doing it for the whole month. But if people peter out, because everyone who wants to fill it out has filled it out, then I'll stop. But I have a pretty good sample for BC already, but more respondents is great. More is always better. I have just enough that I think I should be able to get an actual poll for BC out. So make sure the rest of you respond too. More data, the better. And National's looking good too, so just keep responding. Go in the link, pinned comment. But now let us begin. So the BC election, I'm not sure if it has formally started yet, but it's starting very, very soon, if not formally started yet. Yeah, I think it has formally started. Doesn't really matter at the time of the starting. The election's supposed to be October 19th. So about a month away. And at this stage, BC United is dead. Now, that's not new news. That is very old news. But I just want to say one thing about this. So what I have here is the United Remnants, and it's at about 1%. That's because as of the time of recording this video, there are still a bunch of former BCU candidates who are still on the ballot. They might resign. They're running as independents now, as far as I can tell. They might no longer be on ballot by election day. They might give up. Maybe they'll do something interesting, make a weird party. I don't know. But it still technically exists, and I am forecasting it. It's not looking so hot for them, but, they exist now. Or they still exist. So that leads us to the interesting question, though. Where is this election going? Who's going to win it? And that's a really tricky question. We have had several very close polls since BCU died. Palace had 43.6 to 42.7 for the NDP. Angus Reid had 43 to 44 for the NDP. Research Co had 44 to 42 for the NDP. Main Street had 44 to 46. And Ledger had 44 to 42 again. Occurs to me I can put this on my screen. So here we go. It's on screen now. These are the last 5 polls. Now, notice that these polls almost entirely agree on the NDP vote strength. There's very little disagreement in them. And actually, if you look at the regionals, which I won't for all of these because some of these are paywalled and other ones I don't need to go through all the regionals. But the regionals for the NDP are pretty consistent. There's not much debate or contention or uncertainty about that. The NDP's strength, where they're strong, where they're losing votes, where they're gaining votes. Conversely, though, there is seemingly more dissension about where the BC Conservatives are strong. And I'll caveat this. The dissension isn't in urban areas. And actually, there's even less dissension for the NDP in urban areas. In Vancouver Metro proper, so roughly this area here, there's almost no meaningful disagreement between the different polls. They're all within margin of error of each other. So they're basically the same poll. But where their big disagreements are is Vancouver Island, where some pollsters again, I'm not going to show the raw poll results because some of these are paywalled, have the NDP in the 50s, others low 40s. Some have the BC Conservatives at low 30s, and some have them at nearly 40%. It's quite a big range. Whereas, again, for Metro Vancouver, we're looking at a 4-point range for the 5-point range for the NDP and a 5-point range for the Conservatives. We're looking at 10-point ranges in Vancouver Island. Fraser Valley, we have a similar. Not Fraser Valley. North BC, we have a similar, but possibly even larger range, depending on how serious. Now, the issue with the North versus Vancouver Island is the North has a lot smaller population. This is roughly the North here, these writings. So the margin of error is a lot higher. So this spread is larger, but the margin of error is greater. So keep that in mind. You expect a larger spread on a larger margin of error. But in the North, we're looking at a 10-point difference for the NDP, but up to a 18-point difference for the BC Conservatives. In the South, again, we have about a 13-point swing for the NDP. That's the largest swing for the NDP. The rest of them are pretty tight. But again, we have an 18-point swing for the BC Conservatives. So all this to say is that no matter which model you're looking at for this election, which polls you're looking at, I think it's really important to know, and I want to stress on this here, I don't think we should really take too much. We should give a lot of pollsters and modeling a lot of slack for this election because there's a lot of uncertainty with the BC Conservatives. We're not looking at something like Saskatchewan or New Brunswick or federal election or whatever election you want to name right now, but we have a lot of really clear, strong historical data for the current parties running. That goes back 2, 3, 4 solid elections. Yes, the BC Conservatives have existed since the forever. I think they have existed as long as the party existed. Well, the province has existed. But in its current form, under its current leadership, it's effectively brand new. The party got 1.9% of the vote in 2020. Now they're looking at doing at least 42% better than that. That causes a whole lot of chaos because, as I've touched on in other videos on other provinces, federal too, different parties have different brands, even if they appear to be similar to their opponents. To a conservative, the NDP and the Liberals federally look very similar, but the NDP and the Liberal voter, their bases, the party brands, are distinct. They appeal to different people, categorically different people. The Conservative Party versus BC United is the same thing. To an NDPer, they might both seem to be right-wing parties. They're the same. But they're categorically different. The BC United was a much more of a right liberal party, if you will. So it leaned more into the fiscally conservative, socially liberal bracket. You could even argue it might have been in that category entirely and completely on the social liberal side of the political spectrum. The BC Conservatives, though, are much more centered like the federal Conservatives are. They're fiscally conservative and socially conservative. Moderate in both regards, but they're moderately social and moderately fiscal conservative. That is what the party is going for thus far in its publications, in its messaging, and all that stuff. That's a categorically different party. That's a categorically different brand. We don't really know for certain where that's going to appeal. We can look at some stuff about maybe federal. We can try to glean some information there. It might look very similar to the Poilievre's Conservative Party. But again, the BC NDP itself is actually not very similar to Jagmeet Singh's NDP. They both share the same name, but Singh is wildly incompetent. And for the most part, the BC NDP does politics properly. That doesn't mean that you necessarily like their politics or their policies, but they do the job properly. They articulate them properly. They campaign to the actual base that they can win. In other words, they're an actual serious political party who actually intends and plans on winning elections, unlike Jagmeet Singh. So that makes this election a very complicated election to model and forecast. We have so many unknowns with the BC Conservatives. We have even more unknowns now that the BC United has exploded. Now it seems, in broad strokes, that most of the BC United voters have went to BC Conservative. My modeling says 63% have. But that still means 25% went NDP. Some went Green. Many went other. So there's a lot of noise with that. Because at first glance you say, aha, 25% went NDP, 63% went Conservative. What's so complicated about that? Well, which 25%? Because let's say hypothetically, it was the 25% in places like Peace River over here, or Fort St. John up here. Well, that's slam dunk for the Conservatives. Easy. Or maybe it's, in this case, 25% that are in Victoria and Vancouver Island. Slam dunk for the Conservatives. But if it's a 25% in the Vancouver Metro or South BC went the NDP, this is catastrophic. The BC NDP might will probably win the election if that's the case. Or it could be smooth, and it's just 25% across the entire province. In which case, then you get something like this projection I have. Because I'm assuming it's a smooth distribution. It's about the same everywhere. In which case, then the NDP has an edge, but it's a narrow one. And the same thing applies with that 63% number. Where is it concentrated or is it uniform? Because it could very well be the case that it's actually 100% of BC United voters in Metro Vancouver, but it might only be 40% in Vancouver Island, or whatever way those numbers work out. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And then you also have the uncertainty, too, that because of how the BC United versus NDP versus Green trichotomy was in 2020 and 2017, there's probably a lot of voters this time around who didn't vote in previous cycles because there wasn't a party speaking to a socially conservative person in BC. The only reason those people might have voted is an anti-vote to try to stop the NDP. But now there is a party who's going to give them wins on things like Soji and such like that, or the safe consumption sites, to name two. So now they're going to vote. But then that's going to necessarily alienate some voters. And who does it alienate? Is there anyone it alienates? Because in a hypothetical world, this is not true in BC, obviously, but in a hypothetical world where there is no fiscally conservative, socially liberal voters, if that is a category that doesn't exist, 0 people inhabit there, then there is no loss to be more socially conservative as a conservative party. It's only a winning strategy. But there is people in that category, so have they alienated any? Who knows? And then we have other big unknowns here. The Greens appear to be collapsing. Is that actually real? Are they collapsing? Is this forming a firm, solid two-party system under our eyes in BC? And if so, how are they collapsing? Again, my model based on polling suggests right now 40% of Green voters apparently are going BC Conservative. 16% are going BC NDP. 42% are staying Green. How is that distributed? Is that even accurate? That's what the polls say. That's what the data says. That's what the math says. Is that real, though? Again, we have a lot of unknowns. Because unlike other cycles in other provinces, we don't have historical data to compare to. We have essentially a brand new party that essentially, in the space of like 19 months, went, let's say 24 months, went from 0 to maybe winning the election. There's just so many unknowns here. And with this, I just want to show you some math here. So there are 19 NDP seats that they're leading by less than 10 points. And there are 14 BC Conservative seats that they're leading by less than 14 or less than 10 points. These seats being, for the NDP, Bulkley Valley, North Coast, Nanaimo area, parts of the BC or Vancouver Metro outskirts. And over here, in the BC Conservatives, that guy, these ones, that city. I think that's Kamloops there, actually. Skeena? Again, parts of the BC Metro area. Or Vancouver Metro area, sorry. So we're looking at, right now, September 23rd, when this is uploaded, there's 32 of 87 seats that I would consider marginal. And then of that, we have another 8 BC Conservative seats that are very marginal. And we have 6 BC Conservative seats that are very marginal. Or BC NDP seats that are very marginal. So we have 12 very marginal seats and 32 overall marginal seats. So the very marginals, it's about split, which you should expect. It should be about 50-50 of very marginal seats in most circumstances. But the overall marginal seats, the NDP has a slight advantage. Now, that's not weird. That happens. That's how you win elections. You win most of the marginal seats. But with that ratio, 18-14, if the BC Conservatives win just 2 more and equalize that to 16-16, we are looking at a race that is 48-44. That means that BC Conservatives only need to win 3 more seats outside of parodying or hitting parity on marginal seats. Or in other words, they only need to gain 4 seats to win. Sorry, 5 seats to win. Misspoke there. That's pretty narrow. Like, we're talking here, at the time of recording this, we have about a month. Getting in a position to gain 5 seats in a month when there's already 6 very marginal seats that the BC NDP hold is not a very tall order. That is a very achievable result. Will it happen? No, I will not predict that. This channel is not about predicting what is going to happen or not happen. It's about saying what the current status of a race is. Currently, if the election was September 23rd, 2024, the BC NDP should, on paper, win. Even if you want to go and give the best benefit of the doubt numbers for the BC Conservatives, I would say it's probably 48 to 44. So the BC Conservatives still probably lose. But then, well, you're getting pretty close. It's very close. And I think you see this with a lot of the NDP messaging and marketing right now, and the BC Conservative messaging and marketing. Parties act very differently, especially incumbents, when it's a shoo-in. They're going to take bolder stances. They're going to take more aggressive stances. They're probably going to play a little sloppier than they otherwise would. And what we're seeing is the BC NDP doesn't think it's in a unassailable position. You're seeing them do things like David Eby has said he would change the carbon tax implementation in some way, shape, or form if the Fed stopped requiring it. What that means, he left up for discussion, to my understanding. They'll correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong on that one. Maybe I missed it. That's something that you would not have seen the NDP do or promise if the NDP was clearly and comfortably winning. That's a promise you make when you think you might be losing or it might be too close for comfort and you want to try to shore up one of your weaknesses. Or similarly, David Eby has rolled out or is promising to roll out a policy to change how safe consumption sites work. I didn't look into the great nitty-gritty details of it, so I'm not going to really talk about what is going to change with that, but what the important thing to say about that, because the thing I will always say in these videos is the specificity of policy doesn't matter so much to voters. It's the general arc or trend of policy that matters more, the overall idea of the promises that matter more than the specificities. Because most voters are aware that the politician is not going to necessarily do anything they promised, or what they promise might not be practicable for good, honest reasons. But the gist of Eby's announcement is he's going to try to walk back a bit on safe consumption sites, because it's perceived by not just myself or many in the BC media sphere that it's a liability for the BC NDP. Specifically, it's a big liability with East Asian voters. They're very, very unhappy with the safe consumption sites. And that's a very important demographic because they're concentrated around this part of Vancouver. And notice that this part of Vancouver has several marginal ridings in it. That's a big issue. And the other indicator we're seeing that the BC NDP is very concerned about this race is we're seeing them ramp up targeted attack ads. Now, I'm not going to display any of the particular attack ads here because I don't think any of them are actually really worth discussing in specifics. I only really like to show ads if I want to say something specifically about this ad. Most of these attack ads are pretty generic. In other words, there's nothing necessarily good or intrinsically bad about the attack ad in and of itself. What matters isn't the content of the ad, it's that the ad exists. Because the point of an attack ad and I know other people like them more than I do. I actually think attack ads are most of the time not very useful. They can be useful, especially if you do them properly. But most people don't do them properly because most people don't know what they're doing. But I digress. They're doing a lot of targeted attack ads about fear-mongering of what John Rustad's government might look like. Now, on paper, that sounds, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You want to show that the other guys are bad. Yeah, logic to it, right? But it's an interesting choice. Because the specificities of it, they're not going in generalities or saying it's like they're going to hurt the poor or something like that. No, we're seeing like ads like, haha, this guy's racist, or haha, this woman is a pro-lifer, or haha, this person said a thing 10 years ago, etc. And that's very interesting. Because that means, in a lot of these cases, particularly the one attacking people for being pro-life, or allegedly pro-life, because the BC NDP, just on an aside, and BC United and etc. people, there's been several different attack ads against one particular BC Conservative candidate, Brian Brigette, for Vancouver Langara, saying that he's a pro-lifer, which is hilarious because the guy openly defends the principle that people should have access to abortion. They're attacking him for being pro-life, which is wild. But anyways, back to the main topic on this. So these attack ads, they're not actually to try to take away any people from voting for BC Conservatives. There's very, very few people who are going to look at an ad and be like, oh, wait, the Conservative Party has pro-lifers in it? Oh, I'm not going to vote for them. There's almost no one like that in the year of our Lord 2024. Most people are aware that there are conservatives who are pro-life and they're going to be in conservative parties. That's just reality. It's why, in a lot of regards, I think a lot of the debate about abortion in politics, or like, is abortion a good or bad issue, is kind of pointless because it's baked in already. It might at most be a fundraising drive for someone. Or if you bring up like some of the stuff about past comments, particularly, those really don't matter. They're not changing people's minds who are already going to vote for someone. So then you might ask yourselves, why is BC NDP doing that? Why are they running ads that are not likely going to change minds of people already voting for the other guy? What they're trying to do is shore up their own base. Now, I don't have the BC NDP internals, and the public polls don't seem very concerning regarding their own base's position. My model says... No, actually, I take that back. The public polls do say their position is a little precarious. They're not that precarious, and this might actually make it worse, but I'll get into that. So the public polls, my model averages 75% of 2020 BC NDP supporters are staying, and 20% are defecting Conservative, and then the rest are going to other parties. 4% to Green, for example. So 20% are defecting to the BC Conservatives. That might seem wild. NDPers to Conservatives? What? But that makes sense, because what was BC United? It was the fiscal conservative social liberal party. And what I've said many times before on this channel, that type of policy is going to alienate the social conservative fiscal liberal. And if they're alienated from your party, they're going to vote for the fiscal liberal party. Or not vote. But now that you have a fiscally conservative, socially conservative party, a lot of that social conservative, fiscal liberal type is going to be open to voting for the BC Conservatives. At the price, some fiscal conservative, social liberal types will now vote BC NDP because the political spectrum's changing. In this particular case, it seems like BC might have more people who are willing to defect, or so there's more people in the social conservative, fiscal liberal category than fiscal conservative, social liberal category. But that could just be coincidence. The main gist here, though, is the NDP is seeing that they've lost a lot of retention from 2020. And they're probably seeing it worse in their internal polls if they're doing this publicly. Because 20% is not, it's concerning, but it's not, to me, amazingly concerning, especially since they're gaining a lot from BC United and they're gaining a lot from Green. But it seems to be concerning enough for them. And they're making the classic blunder. Maybe they will stop making the classic blunder. But they're still making the classic blunder. And they're not assessing why they're losing those voters. So their medicine that they're trying to give is to try to paint the BC Conservatives as more socially conservative than the BC Conservatives are on things like life issues. The BC Conservatives aren't going to do anything on that. And actually, legally, they can't really do anything on that unless they want to play a whole lot of chicanery around with hospitals, which I don't think any party in Canada is going to do yet. Maybe in 20 years, but not now. It'll be definitely in Quebec, but I stand by that. I've said that before. But anyways, we're not talking about that for now. Comment below, I guess, if you want, but we're not talking about that right now. So, in a sense, this actually helps the BC Conservatives. And I've always said this, you actually want attack ads against you. Because attack ads against you help you shore up your own base without having to actually say or do anything. The BC NDP attacking the BC Conservatives for being quote-unquote pro-life helps them retain pro-life voters without the BC Conservatives having to say or do anything. And you can say this with any issue. If you want to talk about, say, federal for a second, the Liberals and the NDP keep attacking the Conservatives for wanting to, quote-unquote, cut spending. Now, polls say a lot of Canadians want to cut spending right now. But Poilievre has made very few specific commitments to cutting spending, only things like CBC, as like overt spending cuts. Most of the other things is just redistribution of spending. For example, canceling drugs or safe supply, but then funding state-funded rehab is not going to save money. Might cost more money, actually. Maybe you might see some cancellation of subsidies and stuff in there, but again, he's not made any big promises. But the Liberals and the NDP attacking him, attacking Poilievre for wanting to quote-unquote cut spending, means that the people who are really paranoid and concerned about the deficit can go and be like, aha, Poilievre's going to cut the deficit. And then Poilievre doesn't have to really do anything to win those voters. He just has to make sure he doesn't say anything that alienates those voters. But it's a lot easier to just not make big spending promises than it is to tell voters how you're going to cut spending. Especially because a lot of spending is pretty arcane. It's very difficult to look at a budget and figure out, well, was that an appropriate use of money? Did we get good value for that? Because some things might look like a ripoff, but otherwise make perfect sense. I'll take one example of this. The River Class Destroyer program, a lot of people in the media have said, aha, that's such a waste of money and spending so much money. But a big part of the problem, a big part of the reason why that program costs so much money is we are intentionally building shipbuilding facilities here. Like capacity that did not exist before. Now, if we stop building ships here, then yeah, that probably is a waste of money. But if the plan is that we're going to keep these shipyards running forever, then that huge upfront cost that's included in the River Class Destroyer program to build up Irving Shipbuilding and a couple other shipyards, a lot of capacity, if we keep building ships, that's not a waste of money. It makes these ships look very expensive because it's included in this program, but that's not the same thing as the per ship cost. Which I will just say in general for military equipment, do not take program cost and divide it by product delivered and say that is the unit cost. Because almost always in military procurement, a very large percentage of that contract is going to infrastructure costs that are not per unit cost. But that's a digression here. To get back on topic, so the BC Conservatives and the BC NDP are in a very interesting struggle here. Because of how chaotic this election is, I don't think either party really understands what the map looks like. You can say, aha, you could look at 338 Canada, or you could be really generous and be like, you can look at Bagel Polling, the great Canadian Bagel on YouTube, which, you should, totally, he's great. You can say those things, but you look at myself, you look at 338, you look at anyone else you want to name. There's dozens of people on Twitter who do this, who are usually pretty good for the most part. You can look at as many of these as you want. Okay? But that doesn't mean any or all of these are right. Doesn't. At all. I'll just bring over the 338 projection for a second just to talk about this, make it clear. In Greater Vancouver area, we have a lot of the same seats that are safe, similar ones that are narrow, but all of Richmond is a flip. Surrey Serpentine River is a flip. But 338 doesn't have Port Moody or Coquitlam or Coquitlam-Mallardville as flips for the NDP, for the Conservatives. They have Ladysmith Oceanside, that isn't mine, anyways, as a flip. But not Maple Ridge East. Overall, if we go to this tab, we have a very similar seat estimate. But we have different seats we're projecting because we're using different assumptions. Is my assumptions better than his assumptions? Well, we'll find out on election day, but right now, who knows? So if you're looking at my poll, or my modeling, you're saying, okay, we're the NDP, we need to attack into Coquitlam area, we need to defend Richmond and South Surrey. You're looking at 338, we have to attack into South Surrey, attack into Richmond, and defend Coquitlam if you're the NDP. Just to give one example. Those are completely different strategies. So, it's very hard to figure out where this election is. And I think there's going to be a lot of blundering in this election because I don't think people really understand who their base is. And that's not a slight against David Eby or John Rustad, because so much chaos has just happened politically in BC to see a long-time party go from second place to deregistered in 4 years. And a brand new party effectively going from 2% to 44%, 0 seats, to having, I think currently they have 6 seats in Parliament. We can look up here. 8 seats in Parliament. So the BC Conservatives have went from none to 8 seats in a year and a bit. Like, there's just so much. I fully expect, normally when I make these projections, my goal, because you can never get 100% accurate because of the nature of statistics, it's just very unlikely, is I try to aim to have a 90 to 95% hit rate. So in other words, I get 90 to 95% of the ridings correct. And if I'm getting them wrong, the ones I get wrong, I want it to be the most marginal ones that I'm most likely to get wrong, ideally. And it should be equally or proportionally distributed, ideally. But that's more story for another time. In this race, when I do a post-mortem in November, I'll be happy if I'm looking at like an 80% hit rate. I could easily see being wrong on... I could be wrong on Langara. I could be wrong on Yaletown. I could be wrong on the Port Moody Coquitlam area. I could be wrong on whatever that riding name is. Maybe I'm wrong in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, North Island. Who knows? Boundary, Saminkin. I don't know. Could be wrong on a bunch of these ridings because it's based on assumptions. And most models are based on assumptions, you could say, but these are based on sketchy assumptions because we have nothing to go off of. It's a brand new race, effectively. This would be the equivalent of just starting from scratch because a new party this strong changes everything about a province. Well, that, I bid you adieu, and we'll see you next time with something else. And make sure you fill in the poll and share it with people outside of YouTube too, granting it to your friends, your family, everyone. Well, that, I bid you adieu.